What's up and Happy New Year, everybody. Me, PJ, back again. This is going to be my first album review of the new year 2016. Today I'm going to be talking about the sixth full-length album from the band Mechina, which is entitled Progenitor. It came out the 1st of January this year. Now, for those of you who are new to Mechina, I would describe their sound as a mixture of groove, industrial, and symphonic metal, and it all comes together to bring a very heavy and hard-hitting sound for the most part. I first became acquainted with these guys via their 2013 release Empyrean, which was released on January 1st of that year, and every year since then they've pretty consistently been putting out albums on the 1st of January. 2014 brought us Xenon, and 2015 brought us Acheron, which in my opinion was the strongest they've done so far. And being as that's the case, I was very much looking forward to their new album Progenitor. Now, prior to the release of Progenitor, we got two singles from the band. The first one was called Anagenesis, came out, I believe, on Christmas Eve, and it was very much what you'd expect to hear from Mechina at this point. Very symphonic, very groovy, just very solid track overall. Did have some cleans, which I felt were a tad to the overproduced side. Very evident, like, vocal pitch manipulation going on with those. The second we got was called Cryoshock, which came out the day before, or maybe 2 days before this was released. I can't quite remember. But it was entirely clean sung, but it was a very groovy track, and while the clean vocals were very high pitched and a bit modulated, obviously pitch corrected, I did feel like this was a very catchy song, and it definitely made me look forward to the album. Now, as with the rest of Mechina's albums, this is a concept album with a very futuristic and spacey concept, and this album as a whole flows extremely well and gives off very futuristic vibes throughout. Now, it's only 8 tracks long, which is a bit shorter than other Mechina albums have been in the past, and the first track is just an intro anyways. So, as a whole, we've really got 7 new songs, but that being said, the intro, which is called Mass Locked, is a very good intro, actually. It really sets the mood that you're going to dive into something very futuristic and very out there. I really felt just immersed in the music while listening to this. Really got me into the mood for the rest of the album. After the intro, we have as a song Ashes of Old Earth, which really brings back vibes of the last Mechina album, which I really appreciate a lot. I was very much into that album, and I feel like this is a good extension on it. And it really started out the album quite well. Same with the third track, Starscape, which also brought back memories of old Mechina releases. It even had some really cool parts near the end with somewhat orchestral breaks, as well as sort of ambient female clean vocals, which weren't used so much as lyrical devices, but as more ambient mood setters. After Starscape, we get to basically the middle of the album, which is 2 songs, Cryoshock and The Horizon Effect, which pretty much go together because they're very similar songs. Both are very groovy and very heavy, while also being entirely clean sung. And the lyrics do get somewhat repetitive, but that's kind of an advantage for these songs, as these were 2 of the most memorable tracks on the album, because the hooks really got stuck in my head, and I would find myself humming them as I just kind of did my daily stuff, like just walking around, not even listening to the album, and I would just be thinking about these choruses and just vocal lines, and that really made an impact on me, and these 2 tracks really stand out, even though they're something different than what you would normally expect from the band. After these 2 fully clean sung tracks, we have the last 3 tracks on the album. We have Anagenesis, which I talked about earlier, basically standard Mechina. It's the longest song as well on the album, and it's definitely a big standout track as far as the songs that do feature harsh vocals rather than just cleans. After Anagenesis, we have Planetfall, which is probably the heaviest and fastest track on the record. There's no cleans whatsoever, and it also features a guest guitar solo from Dean Arnold, who you may remember from the band Primal Frost. If you've ever checked them out, I would highly recommend giving them a listen. Now, the last track, Progenitor, is probably my favorite on this album. It's good all around. The intro part is one of my favorite intros. It's very ambient in scope, very spacey, and it features these female vocals which sound very traditional. I'm not really sure what language they're in, but it brought to my mind Helvetii, and when they use sort of female vocals in a more traditional sense, like something like if Helvetii had formed in space and written sci-fi epics instead of about Rome and such. But anyways, that was just a personal comparison, and some people might not hear that. But after that, it kind of launches into a more gruff Mechina track, which I really, really dug. And there are some cleans. They make an appearance near the end, and they did kind of throw off the vibe a little bit because they're very pitch corrected, and it brought back vibes of post-hardcore and some of the modern metalcore you hear these days, and I'm not a huge fan of that style, so that kind of wore down the track a little bit for me. Now, in general, this album has phenomenal production. It sounds absolutely great. It just immerses you in this sonic experience. The guitar and bass really add this just heaviness to this album and really just takes it to a very groovy place as well. If you're a fan of like really bouncy tracks, not necessarily quite too like gent, but very groovy nonetheless. The drums I do believe are programmed, but that being said, they do sound very like playable as far as what a human could do, which adds a lot to the album in my opinion, and they are very groovy in parts, and I really enjoyed that aspect of the music. Now, as far as the keyboards and symphonics go, and on this release they tend to stray away from their previous industrial style and harp more onto the symphonic aspects that they had used in the past, which I really enjoyed. I'm not the hugest fan of industrial, even though I do like a great number of bands, but I felt like this symphonic approach was definitely the way to go for these guys. Now, I've touched a little bit on the vocals throughout this review. I felt like the cleans were a little too produced for my taste. They kind of detracted in the way they were very just produced, and they just didn't sound like natural at all. And whereas the growls sounded very organic, which I really enjoyed. So it's kind of a harsh duality. Even though I did like a lot of the clean vocals and a lot of the clean choruses, it definitely detracted a little bit from my enjoyment, the fact that they were so overproduced. Overall, this album flows very well if you listen to it from front to back as a concept album, but I do feel like it's a little lacking on standout tracks. The two singles they released, Cryoshock and Anagenesis, definitely stand out to me, as well as the title track Progenitor, which I felt was personally the best song on the album. So as an album, it flows really well. It's a great listen, but just picking out songs that are memorable is a little bit harder for me, and that kind of detracts from my overall enjoyment of the record. So overall, for a score, I would give this one about a 7.5 out of 10. I do feel like it's not as good as Acheron was, which was a little bit of a letdown, but overall, this is definitely worth a listen. I'll link you to their Bandcamp and Facebook, and where you can buy a physical copy of this album. Anyways, that's it for this album review. If you've heard this album, let me know what you thought about it. And until next time, I'll see you guys later, and keep it metal.